Okay, cool.
All right. Has anybody, by show of hands, spent time in Daniel before? Previous experience with Daniel? A little bit, a little bit. Okay. Oh, the book of Daniel. Everybody in 1:1? It reads, in the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem and besieged it. All right. Does anybody know who Nebuchadnezzar is? Okay. Nebuchadnezzar, as it says here, is the king of Babylon. We'll talk more about Nebuchadnezzar shortly here, but before we get to him, since he'll be kind of a main focus throughout the book of Daniel, does anyone know who Jehoiakim, king of Judah, is? No? Very good. Let's go take a look at who he is. Keep your finger in Daniel. We're going to go to 2 Kings chapter 2, or chapter 23, excuse me. 2 Kings chapter 23. We're going to be in 2 Kings chapter 23, and we're going to look at verse number 34. It reads, and Pharaoh, Necho, made Eliakim, the son of Josiah, king in the room of Josiah his father, and turned his name into Jehoiakim, and took Jehoaz away, and he came to Egypt and died there. So, who is Jehoiakim? Jehoiakim's actual name is Eliakim. That's his original Hebrew name, but Pharaoh Necho changes his name to Jehoiakim, and the position that he holds is that he is the king over Judah. Is everyone familiar with Judah, the 12 tribes of Israel? Very good. I want you to take a look at verses 36 and 37 next, where it says, Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Zebidah, the daughter of Pedaiah of Rumah. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his fathers had done. So, in 2 Kings, we get to see a history of the different kings over Judah and Jerusalem. And unfortunately, Jehoiakim, or Eliakim as his original name was not a good king. And it says, according to the scriptures, that he did evil in the sight of the Lord as his fathers did. So there was a string of evil kings throughout the history of the kingdom of Judah, and Jehoiakim kind of follows suit. This is important because we're going to see some prophecy shortly here of what's to come in light of that. Take a look at the beginning of chapter 24 here for 2 Kings. We're going to read verses 1 to 4. In his days, so that is the days of Jehoiakim, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant 3 years. Then he turned and rebelled against him. And the Lord sent against him bands of the Chaldees. Can anyone tell me, who are the Chaldees? Nobody know? Those are people from Babylon. That's where Nebuchadnezzar is king, as we see here. But anytime you see that, the Chaldees, C-H-A-L-D-E-S, L-D-E-E-S, Chaldees. It's a reference to people from Babylon. And bands of the Syrians, and bands of the Moabites, and bands of the children of Ammon, and sent them against Judah to destroy it, according to the word of the Lord, which he spake by his servants, the prophets. So we see here that Jehoiakim is taken captivity by Nebuchadnezzar as his servant. He serves him 3 years and tries to rebel, and God winds up punishing his rebellion against the king of Babylon by sending all of these groups against him to destroy him. So far, so good? Okay. It says, verse 3, surely at the commandment of the Lord came this upon Judah to remove them out of his sight for the sins of Manasseh according to all that he did, and also for the innocent blood that he shed, for he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood which the Lord would not pardon. So there's been a long string of sins, and in particular, innocent blood that's been spilled by these kings over Judah. And Jehoiakim continues on in this trend of sinning against God and rebelling against him, and finds himself in the crosshairs here when he tries to go against the punishment that God's already brought against him. If that makes sense. So he's brought in as a servant to Nebuchadnezzar, him and his people. He rebels against him after a time, and God says, I'm not done with you in this capacity yet, and brings these enemies of Israel against them. So that's why we see all these different bands to come against them. And as it says in 3 and 4, a large part of why this judgment is taking place on them is because of this long string of evil kings that had come about that had continued to rebel against God. So hopefully this gives you guys a little better idea of who it is that we're dealing with back in Daniel 1:1. So I'm going to start us again in Daniel 1:1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem and besieged it. So like we talked about, Nebuchadnezzar is going to wind up taking Jehoiakim as a servant, and he's going to serve him for 3 years. But at this time in Daniel 1:1, Daniel's telling us that he's starting from the point of Babylon coming to Jerusalem and besieging it. In verse 2, it goes on, and the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. Okay. So we see here Jehoiakim's delivered into Nebuchadnezzar's hands by God. It says that the Lord gave him into his hand. We see that part of the vessels of the house of God, so these would have been gold and silver instruments within the house of the Lord, that they were carried into the land of Shinar. Does anyone know where that is? That is another reference to Babylon. Shinar, that's where they were coming from. So that's where Nebuchadnezzar was coming from. The land of Shinar, or Babylon. And that's why those things are carried into that land. It says to the house of his God, and into the treasure house of his God. Verse number 3. And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princes. Okay. Is everyone familiar with what a eunuch is? Yes? Okay. I'm glad.
Wait, is that the one that we talked about with a certain person? A certain person about their body or something?
Yes.
Oh, that's very sad.
It is.
Oh, I don't want to talk about that.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to talk about it a little bit. We're not going to get too gory with the details here. We're going to turn to Matthew 19:12. Where Jesus actually has a little bit to say about the topic of eunuchs here. So Matthew chapter 19. We're going to be looking at Matthew chapter 19, verse number 12. It says, "For there are some eunuchs which were so born from their mother's womb, and there are some eunuchs which were made eunuchs of men, and there be eunuchs which have made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. He that is able to receive it, let him receive it." I'm going to talk just very briefly here about what each of these are referring to. So when we think of what a eunuch is, generally, that's this first category. For there are some eunuchs which were so born from their mother's womb. These would be those that are unable to bear children from the time that they were born. It says, "And there are some eunuchs which were made eunuchs of men," meaning that there was an outside influence of another person who made that person to be a eunuch. If you catch my trend here. "And there be eunuchs which have made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake." Now, when it says, "there be eunuchs which have made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake," it doesn't necessarily mean that people have physically harmed themselves for the kingdom of heaven's sake, but rather these would be individuals that have chosen a lifetime of celibacy for the Lord's sake. There's other passages that deal with this topic. Paul stresses singleness for the sake of being able to have a sole focus on the Lord and not being distracted with the desires that are kind of put on you by being married, a husband worrying about his wife's needs and a wife worrying about her husband's needs and so on. But I wanted to touch on this since the topic of eunuchs is unfortunately an important one at the beginning of the new home.
This is just regarding men though, right? It's like a nun.
Yes, this.
So where does nun come from?
Nuns, you could think of them fitting generally in this last category of there be eunuchs which have made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. They would be individuals that have chosen to take up a lifestyle of celibacy for the duration of their life to focus on serving God. Now, nuns within the scope of like the Catholic Church, that's a different conversation necessarily because the Catholic Church kind of has its own positions and titles and all these things. So I wouldn't feel comfortable speaking at length on that because I don't know a whole lot about nuns within the scope of the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is not my favorite to begin with, but there's nothing biblically unsound or wrong with an individual choosing to live a life of celibacy and devotion to serving God. So the idea of being a nun. Yeah. It's true. It's absolutely true. So it's not a bad notion, but again, I would encourage anybody who's considering that to do it in light of what Scripture says and with a desire to serve the Lord as opposed to falling into a trap where you may just be serving the will of
The church.
Yeah. All right. Before we go back to Daniel, keep one finger there, but we're going to go back to 2 Kings and look at chapter 20. I told you we'd be dealing with a little bit of prophecy there, and I intend to deliver here. So we're going to look at 2 Kings chapter 20. We're going to start in verse number 14. 2 Kings 20:14. It says, "And I will forsake the remnant of mine." Oh, that's 21:14. "Then came Isaiah the prophet unto King Hezekiah, and said unto him, What said these men, and from whence came they unto thee? And Hezekiah said, They are come from a far country, even from Babylon. And he said, What have they seen in thine house? So the prophet Isaiah is asking Hezekiah, what have you shown them? And if you look in the preceding verses, Hezekiah showed them everything. He says, and Hezekiah answered, all the things that are in mine house have they seen. There is nothing among my treasures that I have not showed them. So these men from an outside country out of Babylon came to the king of Judah, Hezekiah, back at the time, and he showed them all his most precious belongings in his house. He didn't conceal anything from them. Verse 16, and Isaiah said unto Hezekiah, hear the word of the Lord. Behold, the days come that all that is in thine house, and that which thy fathers have laid up in store unto this day, shall be carried into Babylon. Nothing shall be left, saith the Lord. So you guys remember back in Daniel, when Nebuchadnezzar came, he took the king of Judah, but he also took some of the possessions out of the house of the Lord. He goes on in verse 18, and of thy sons that shall issue from thee, which thou shalt beget, shall they take away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. So, if we compare that with what we're seeing in these first few verses here in Daniel, it's an exact fulfillment of what the prophet Isaiah told the king Hezekiah. Daniel 1:3, and the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel and of the king's seed and of the princes. So that's why the wording is really important here, because there's a direct reference between 2 Kings 20 here, where it says, and of thy sons that shall issue forth from thee, and here in verse 3, where it says, not just the children of Israel, but of the king's seed, which we see with his son Jehoiakim at this point, along with others, which we'll deal with shortly. So, back in Daniel chapter 1, let's pick up with verse 4. And of the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, and skillful in all wisdom and cunning and knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. All right. Who again are the Chaldeans? The Babylonians. Very good. All right. I want you guys to notice in verse 4, right around the middle here, it says, in all wisdom and cunning and knowledge and understanding, science. Not a word that shows up a whole lot in Scripture, but it does show up a few times. I want to take you guys to 1 Timothy, and we're going to look at chapter 6, verse 20. Because there is a warning for us about that exact topic. First Timothy chapter 6, verse number 20. Reads, O Timothy, keep that which is committed to thy trust, avoiding profane and vain babblings and oppositions of science, falsely so called. So there's a warning during the church age about science falsely so called. I don't know how easy it'll be to kind of demonstrate this here. I'm used to doing this from my laptop on the live stream, but if you have a phone, just go ahead and open up a browser and go to Bible Hub if you would. Bible Hub. If you Google it, it'll be the first thing. It's BibleHub.com. And then once you're there, go ahead and type in Daniel, or DAN 1:4. Daniel 1:4. All right. Can I get someone to read the New International Version? We're going to go through a couple versions.
I'm not sure this,
Okay. No problem.
unless you guys are all left out. Well, there's no one, there's no way, what? It's just.
Yeah, there
yes.
should be a password
Oh,
out
it's
there.
just
I
yes.
saw this.
Oh, I'm sure.
While you're getting on, I'll go ahead and start us on a couple of these. So Daniel 1:4 in the New International Version reads, "Young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians." Notice that there's no mention of science in the New International Version. We're going to look at the English Standard Version. It says, "Youths without blemish, of good appearance, and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace and to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans." Once again, no reference to science. Let's try the New King James Version. It says, "Young men in whom there was no blemish, but good looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge, and quick to understand, who had ability to serve in a king's palace, and whom they might teach the language and literature of the Chaldeans." Hopefully you guys are seeing a trend here. We'll wrap up with the New American Standard. "Youths in whom there was no impairment, who were good looking, suitable for instruction in every kind of expertise, endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge, and who had ability to serve in the king's court. And he ordered Ashpenaz to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans." So, in none of these versions, other than the King James, do you see the word science actually used here. Let's try 1 Timothy 6:20 and see. So 1 Tim 6:20, 1 Timothy 6:20. And I'm going to run through these same versions kind of quickly here. So the New International Version. "Timothy, guard what has been entrusted to your care, turn away from godlessness, from godless chatter, and the opposing ideas of what is falsely called knowledge." English Standard Version. "O Timothy, guard the deposit entrusted to you, avoid the irreverent babble and contradictions of what is falsely called knowledge." New King James Version. "O Timothy, guard what was committed to your trust, avoiding the profane and idle babblings and contradictions of what is falsely called knowledge." New American Standard. "Timothy, protect what has been entrusted to you, avoiding worldly empty chatter and the opposing arguments of what is falsely called knowledge." So, why do we care whether or not it says science or knowledge or any of these other words that are chosen for Daniel 1:4? The reason it's relevant and that it's important is, especially in the times and the day and age that we are in, science has grown to be a religion all its own. And even amongst those who would be professing Bible scholars, there are many who hold to science as their true religion as opposed to Christianity and the truth of the Bible and the gospel that's found therein. What's more is, even amongst those who do believe in the scriptures and the truth of the word, there's many that take science and go put it on kind of its own pedestal above what it is that the word says itself. So in an effort to avoid any kind of attack on this pet topic for them, those that have produced these other versions avoid using the word science, especially in 1 Timothy, where it talks about science falsely so called, which is a warning for us during this time. Does that make sense to everybody?
What is science so falsely so called?
So that's a great question. Let's start with what science is. Science, what it ought to be, is it's the study of the physical material world that God has created. That's what science is. So science falsely so called would be something that claims to be that, but isn't. So when we look at what science is today, it looks to go beyond that. It looks to correct the scriptures. It looks to contradict what the Word of God says and to try to lead people astray. It's become its own religion here, where it makes these grand claims that really can't be. There's no evidence for it. For example, there's no hard evidence for it, I'll say. So it's largely a collection of many theories. I'm not saying that there isn't anything valuable to be learned from science today. There's a lot of things that we learn from scientific study and scientific fields, but there's other things like evolution, for example, that is a very kind of easy example of science falsely so called. It claims to be science and it stands on a bunch of theory, but the problem with evolution is that when push comes to shove, there's no hard physical evidence of what it claims out in the real world, if that makes sense. This claim, for example, that animals evolve from one type to another, we don't see out of nature, and they haven't been able to reproduce that in labs or through any types of tests or studies. So, different than, let's say, that a horse and a zebra share a common ancestor. I think we can all agree these are the same type of animal, even though they're different animals. A wolf and a dog share a common ancestor, no problem. But there is a problem if you want to make the claim that frogs led to apes, led to people. That would be an example of science falsely so called.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a definite, yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question though. Any other questions on what we've been discussing so far? Okay. Let's pick back up then with Daniel 4 and continue with 5. It says, then to stand in the king's palace, whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Can anybody tell me what else have we come across so far that mentioned 3 years?
When you probably bring Second Kings.
Mm-hmm.
The prophecy thing.
What was going to happen in 3 years or after 3 years? That's right. That's right. So Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, he actually is going to rebel after those 3 years. But at the time that Jehoiakim and these Israelites are taken out of Judah into captivity, without them knowing that Jehoiakim's going to rebel in 3 years, they were planning to take these children, as it says in verse 4, in whom there was no blemish, but they were well favored, skillful, and all these different things. They were going to take 3 years to groom these kids to be very educated, that they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. They were going to raise them on the king's meat and his provision of the wine which he drank, and they were basically going to accommodate them to Babylonian high life, and they were going to be trusted advisors to the king. But they would undergo about a 3-year training period. But it's funny that Jehoiakim, along the way, he's planned along that same period of time to rebel at the end of that time. I want you to notice here that this is a little bit more of a, that's what I'm looking for here. It's like a devotional takeaway. So this isn't a doctrinal take from what's happening here, but I want you to see that Nebuchadnezzar, it says that he took the children of Israel and of the king's seed, and his game plan was to take those children of the king's seed and to transform them by basically indoctrinating them with Babylonian learning, teaching them to talk like the Babylonians, to eat like the Babylonian king, and to drink the way that the Babylonian king drank. So while it's not a doctrinal takeaway, a lesson here for us is that this is kind of a type of what happens with the world around us. That it looks to take the king's seed and to corrupt us through worldly influences, whether it be worldly learning, the way that the world speaks, the way that the world eats or drinks, etc., etc. Let's pick up with Daniel 1:5. Or we just did Daniel 1:5, excuse me. We're going to go down to verse 6 then. Now among these were of the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. How many of you guys recognize the name David? Yeah, it's the name of the book. What about Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah? Do those names sound familiar to anybody? All right, we'll see if they sound familiar here in just a minute. Verse 7, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names, for he gave unto Daniel the name of Belteshazzar, that's a weird one, and to Hananiah of Shadrach, and to Mishael of Meshach, and to Azariah of Abednego. What about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Are those a little bit more familiar? Yeah.
I forgot that they had a different name. I totally forgot it. Because you never ever hear the other names from anybody.
That's what's interesting is, so they're brought into the kingdom of Babylon, they're given a new identity, they're given new names, they're taught to speak as the Babylonians. And how do we remember them? By their Babylonian name rather than by their Jewish name. Isn't that strange? Mm-hmm. Even though Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego are well remembered by many throughout history for their devotion to God and willingness to stand by him even in the face of imminent death. Isn't that kind of wild? All right. Moving on to verse number 8. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Excuse me. I really want you guys to notice in the beginning of verse 8, the wording there. Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself. So right from the jump, Daniel understood that there was going to be things about their circumstances that he couldn't control. He couldn't control, but he was going to have to learn the things that the Chaldeans wanted him to learn, that he was going to have to speak the way that they spoke to some extent, but there were also things that he wasn't going to have to accept. And he purposed in his heart, it says, that he would not defile himself. Turn with me, if you guys would, to, where are we going? Proverbs chapter 23, and we're going to look at verse 7. Yep, Proverbs 23, verse number 7. All right, it reads, for as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. Eat and drink, saith he to thee, but his heart is not with thee. Notice that first half. For as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. Well, Daniel said he purposed in his heart not to defile himself. When it says right here that as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. So just as he purposed it in his heart, that's what he was. And moving on in Daniel 1 to verse 9, we'll see how God responds to that. So at the end of verse 8 there, therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. What was the first thing that God did after Daniel purposed this in his heart? Yeah, that's exactly right. He gave Daniel favor. Notice though, in the middle of verse 8, well, let's walk through 8 one more time. Daniel purposed in his heart, that's the first thing he did, that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Notice the next thing he did. Therefore, he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. So Daniel purposed it in his heart, but then what did he do? He acted on that purposing. So the next thing that he did after purposing it in his heart is he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Once he took that action, then verse 9, now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. Daniel didn't receive favor just for purposing it in his heart to do something. Daniel purposed it in his heart, he acted on that, and God gave him favor for acting on that purpose that he had set in his heart. Does that make sense? Very good. All right. Let's pick it up in verse 10 then. And the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king. Isn't it interesting that he tells us who his lord is?
Yeah.
My lord the king, who hath appointed your meat and your drink, for why shall he see your faces worse, liking than the children which are of your sort? Then shall ye make me endanger my head to the king. So, why is it that the prince of the eunuchs cares what Daniel and his friends eat or drink?
He'll get in trouble and they don't do it.
Yep. So he says here, why should he see your faces, that is, why should the king see your faces worse, liking than the children which are of your sort? Why should he see you looking worse than the rest that were brought? Then shall ye make me endanger my head to the king. So the prince of the eunuchs, it was his responsibility to look over, as the title implies, the eunuchs, these children from Israel that were brought and that they were raising up. Now, if some of the children are doing well and looking good and fair, and then there's this group over here that's his direct responsibility, and they look sickly or tired or they're not doing very well, the king was going to take that out on him to the point of he's endangering his head. He would have killed him for mistreating them. Verse 11, then said Daniel to Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So notice that the Lord's still using their Hebrew names.
Yeah.
Prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. Okay, who can tell me what is pulse?
I just really vegetables.
Mm-hmm.
But that
Yep, that's exactly right. It's vegetables. It tends to refer to things like beans and legumes, but you can take it as vegetables, broadly, is what they were given to eat, and water to drink.
Is this the part where he's getting the normal fast and people do
It is. Yes. Anytime, that's a really good point. Anytime you hear somebody mention doing a Daniel fast, it's why it's a vegetables only fast. They get it from Daniel 1. it's not a fast here, it's just,
That's just what you're eating.
all right, yeah, it's,
That's your food.
right. But for whatever reason, some people have taken to adopting it as a fast. Verse 13, or before we go on, back in 10, dealing with the prince of the eunuchs and him worrying about there being consequences for what happens to those that he's got entrusted to him, those prisoners essentially that are in his care. Is there an example in the New Testament that you can think of where there's somebody worried about what would happen to them based off of what happens to prisoners entrusted to them?
All escapes, the guard. Saves himself,
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right, Nate. In the New Testament, there's a moment where Paul and Silas are put into prison. It says that they worship God and they sang hymns, and that there's an earthquake that God causes. It breaks the prison open. All of the chains off the prisoners fall off, and exactly like you said, the guard freaks out. He says, I'm going to kill myself, essentially. I'm going to fall on my own sword here, because he knows that if any of those prisoners escape, that those that he answers to are going to have his head literally for it. So there's kind of an interesting parallel here between, or the way that responsibility is looked at all the way back then, back in Jesus' time versus kind of now. Responsibility is kind of a loose and fast word that is thrown around but doesn't really mean a whole lot. You know what I mean? Let's go back to Daniel 1:13. It says, Then let our countenances be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat of the portion of the king's meat, and as thou seest, deal with thy servants. What does it mean to have your countenance be looked upon? Well, your countenance is your appearance. So generally your physical appearance. So that's why Daniel says, Then let our countenance be looked upon before thee, and the countenance or the physical appearance of the children that eat of the portion of the king's meat. So look at them and look at us and notice, and we'll see whether we look sickly and thin and unwell, or whether or not we also look well taken care of. Verse 14. So he consented to them, that being the master of the eunuchs, consented to Daniel, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. He consented to them in this matter and proved them 10 days. We gave them 10 days to do this Daniel fast. Verse 15. At the end of 10 days, their countenances appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. Thus Melzar took away the portion of their meat and the wine that they should drink, and gave them pulse. Verse 17. As for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. One thing that the Lord has had me to do in certain times and periods with my walk with him is to take passages of scripture and turn them into prayers. Oftentimes it's a very simple, not like some big deep thing, but I mention that because this is one of my favorite verses for that. Because it says that God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom. And Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. It's the way that I look at it. It's a very valuable and very powerful thing to be praying for, to ask the Lord to give you these things. And we see that it is something that, to those who purpose themselves to follow after him, as it says, to not defile themselves and pursue him, God is willing to grant these things to those individuals. So I would encourage you, pray for these things, but don't just pray for them, but do like Daniel did. Purpose in your heart not to be defiled by this world, and act on that. And God will grant you favor I'm not necessarily at liberty here to say that he's going to grant you understanding in all visions and dreams here. He may or he may not. But I do know that from what the word says in James, that if you need knowledge, that if you ask, or those that need wisdom, if they ask him, that he will be faithful to provide it. All right, verse number 18. Now at the end of the days that the king had said he should bring them in, then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king communed with them, and among them all was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. And Daniel continued even unto the first year of King Cyrus. Okay, so how much learning and wisdom and knowledge did God impart to these four? He gave them so much that the king found them to be 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all the land in these things. It's pretty amazing. In verse 21, it mentions Daniel continued even unto the first year of King Cyrus. So, who is that not? It's not King Nebuchadnezzar, and it's not King Jehoiakim. So, there's another king that's going to be relevant here during the time that Daniel is active in the role of prophet, but also in the role of an advisor to the king that we'll deal with in the book of Daniel. Are there any questions, comments, or concerns about chapter 1 so far for the book of Daniel? Okay. We'll continue on then with Daniel chapter 2. I do have a hard stopping point that I don't know that we'll quite get to, but we'll see what we can get through since we've got some time. Daniel chapter 2. And in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams, wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him. Then the king commanded to call the magicians and the astrologers and the sorcerers and the Chaldeans, for to show the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. Drink some water real quick. Oh. And the king said unto them, I have dreamed a dream, and my spirit was troubled to know the dream. Then spake the Chaldeans to the king in Syriac, O king, live forever. Tell thy servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the thing is gone from me. If ye will not make known unto me the dream with the interpretation thereof, you shall be cut in pieces, and your house shall be made a dunghill. All right, who can tell me what's happening now in chapter 2? What's going on? We know Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. We know it says that his spirit's troubled. His sleep brake from him, meaning he was having a hard time sleeping after having this dream. But what happens after that?
Trying to figure out what it means.
What's that?
He's trying to figure out what it means.
Yeah, he's trying to figure out what it means. But he also can't remember what the dream was either. Verse 5 says, the king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the thing is gone from me, meaning he doesn't even remember what the dream was. It says, if you will not make known unto me the dream, so if you can't tell me what the dream is, with the interpretation thereof. So you've got to tell me what my dream was, and you've got to explain my dream to me. Otherwise, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made a dunghill. So, to all these advisors to the king says, I had a dream. I want you to tell me what it is. I don't remember what it was. I want you to interpret it. And if you can't, I'm going to chop you into pieces and turn your house into a dome. That sounds fair, right? Yeah. All right, well, verse 6, he goes on, but if ye show the dream and the interpretation thereof, so if you can tell me the dream and interpret it, ye shall receive of me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore, show me the dream and the interpretation thereof. I've got all these grand rewards if you can do this. So just tell me the dream and the interpretation. Verse 7, they answered again and said, let the king tell his servants the dream. Notice they immediately go, come on, man, quit playing this game. Just tell us what the dream is so we can interpret it. Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation of it. The king answered and said, I know of certainty that ye would gain the time, because ye see the thing is gone from me. But if ye will not make known unto me the dream, there is but one decree for you. For ye have prepared lying and corrupt words to speak before me. So, the king's not a fool. He knows that if you won't make the dream known unto me, there's only one thing that you have in mind. You have prepared lying and corrupt words to speak before me. Not very trustworthy advisors if that's what you're expecting them to do. Till the time be changed, therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that ye can show me the interpretation thereof. So unless you can tell me the dream, I'm not going to trust the interpretation. Verse 10, the Chaldeans answered before the king and said, there is not a man upon the earth that can show the king's matter. Therefore, there is no king, lord, nor ruler that asks such things at any magician or astrologer or Chaldean. Notice the very precise words the Lord uses here. There is not a man upon the earth that can show the king's matter. That is an absolutely true statement. There is no man by his own power that could have provided what it was that the king was asking. It's not possible. How would you know what's happening in somebody else's head while they're sleeping? Be able to see their dream in the fullness to the point that you can then explain it back to them with the interpretation. And it is a rare thing that the king requireth, and there is none other that can show it before the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. For this cause the king was angry and very furious, and commanded to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. Sounds like a very reasonable guy, huh? He gets angry at the fact that they can't tell him his dream and the interpretation on the spot. So he says, I'm going to destroy all of you. And he gets very angry and furious. Verse 13, and the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain, and they sought Daniel and his fellow to be slain. Verse 14, then Daniel answered with counsel and wisdom to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, which was gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. Before we move forward, I want to go back to verse number 10 here. There was a cross-reference I wanted to take us to. Again, dealing with what I have highlighted, there's not a man upon the earth that can show the king's matter. Take a look at Isaiah chapter 41. Isaiah chapter 41. We're going to start with verse 21. Isaiah 41, verse number 21. It says, produce your cause, saith the Lord. Bring forth your strong reasons, saith the King of Jacob. Let them bring them forth, and show us what shall happen. Let them show the former things what they be, that we may consider them, and know the latter end of them, or declare us things for to come. Show the things that are to come hereafter, that we may know that ye are gods. Yea, do good or do evil, that we may be dismayed, and behold it together. Behold, ye are of nothing, and your work of naught, an abomination is he that chooseth you. This is the Lord issuing a challenge. If you're so great, tell us the future. Verse 23, show the things that are to come hereafter, that we may know that ye are gods. If you want to know who the real God is, there's only one, and there's only ever been one, who successfully told the future time and again. And it's a challenge that he issues to anybody else who wants to make the claim that they are God, or that they could stand toe-to-toe in any way, shape, or form. Okay, you're so smart. Tell us the future. That's the challenge that God issues. If you look at Isaiah 46, verses 9 and 10, the word says, remember the former things of old. This is Isaiah 46, verse 9. Remember the former things of old, for I am God, and there is none else. I am God, and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times the things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. God is the only one who is able to tell the end from the beginning, the former things of old, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times the things that are not yet done. For those of you guys that were here when we did our study through the book of Revelation, we got to see a multitude of prophecies about things that are still yet in the future. Much of the scripture, when we go look at it, we see a description and an account of things that are done in the past. We're working our way through Daniel. Much of what we're going to see in Daniel are things that have already taken place. Babylon already took Jehoiakim captive. He already rebelled. Daniel and his friends have already undergone all these things that we're reading about. One of the beautiful things about Daniel is that we're going to get to see both prophecy that has been fulfilled and prophecy that has not been fulfilled out of this book. We're not quite there yet with just dealing with chapter 1 and a little bit of chapter 2 here, but I want you guys to recognize prophecy for what it means to the Lord, because it's something that he holds, obviously, in very high regard here as a litmus test for legitimacy. But let's dial back to Daniel 2, and we were in Daniel 2:14. Now we read 14 for us to start us off. Then Daniel answered with counsel and wisdom to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, which was gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree so hasty from the king? Then Arioch made the thing known to Daniel. Then Daniel went in and desired of the king that he would give him time and that he would show the king the interpretation. So Daniel says, okay, let's just slow it down a little bit. You give me a little bit of time, and I will come back with the interpretation. Verse 17. Then Daniel went to his house and made the thing known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, that they would desire mercies of the God of heaven concerning this secret. Excuse me. What do you think that they did when it says that they would desire mercies of the God of heaven concerning the secret?
They asked God, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Exactly. Daniel says, give me some time. And what's the first thing he does? He goes to his 3 closest friends and says, we need to pray about this right now.
Smart man.
That's right.
It was one day, but one.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it says that he then made the thing known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, verse 18, that they would desire mercies of the God of heaven concerning this secret, that Daniel and his fellows should not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Verse 19, Then was the secret revealed unto Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. So Daniel goes, tells his friends, says, we need to pray about this right now. God reveals the thing to him, and what do? Yep. They come back to God with praise and thanksgiving. All right. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Verse 20, Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And he changeth the times and the seasons, and he removeth kings, and setteth up kings, and giveth wisdom unto the wise, and knowledge to them that know understanding. Verse 22, he revealeth the deep and secret things, he knoweth what is in the darkness, and the light dwelleth with him. Verse 23, I thank thee and praise thee, O thou God of my fathers, who hast given me wisdom and might, and hast made known unto me now what we desired of thee, for thou hast now made known unto us the king's matter. We're going to stop there, and I want you guys to go look at Deuteronomy 29:29. Deuteronomy 29:29. All right. Deuteronomy 29:29 reads, the secret things belong unto the Lord our God, but those things which are revealed belong unto us and to our children forever, that we may do all the words of this law. So, according to Scripture, who do the secret things belong to? Yep, that's right. The secret things belong unto the Lord our God. So, Daniel and his friends were right in going to God to seek an answer for the secret thing. It's hard to imagine something more secret than the dream of somebody else that they refused to tell you what it was. Take a look, if you would, over at Isaiah 46. We're going to look at, no? We're going to look there. We're going to go to Luke 10:21, sorry. Luke 10:21. All right. We are in Luke chapter 10, verse 21. In that hour, Jesus rejoiced in spirit and said, I thank thee, O Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that thou hast hid these things from the wise and prudent, and hast, what's that next word? Revealed them unto babes. Even so, Father, for so it seemed good in thy sight. So, not only do secrets belong to the Lord our God, but he's also able to do what? Reveal them, yes. And it says, not just that he revealed them, but in this case, he's revealed some unto babes, meaning those that are young or new in the faith. So, even just being new to coming to Christ, this is something we talked before about in our conversation about maturity, that there are secrets that this world doesn't know and that they can't understand, that God reveals to those that come to him, those that are born again into his family. Our last cross-reference here is in Proverbs 3:32. All right, it says, "For the froward is abomination to the Lord, but his secret is with the righteous." So again, those secrets belong to the Lord, but he's willing to reveal them to those who come into his family. And specifically, it says his secret is with the righteous. We know that Daniel was righteous in his intentions and his actions based off of what we saw in Daniel chapter 1, where he purposes in his heart not to be defiled and to choose to follow after the Lord as opposed to conforming to the world the way that some of his peers did back in Daniel chapter 1. We're going to land the study there for tonight. We're not going to dive into Nebuchadnezzar's dream and the interpretation thereof. I'll let that be what we pick up next week, especially since we're just about out of time for class here. Does anyone have any questions on Daniel chapter 2 for what we've covered so far? Any questions about Nebuchadnezzar, Chaldeans, the sorcerers, any of this shenanigans that we've seen?
The same king that in role play for yeah.
Yep.
Do we get to see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I just not remember, because we've done, you and I have done.
Mm-hmm.
And that's in Daniel.
That is in Daniel, yes.
So I was thinking he seems a little, even in chapter 1, 2, he seems a little unstable.
Yes.
And then,
Yeah. We'll see a string of unstable actions out of this king throughout Daniel. All right. Well, with that, I'm going to go ahead and close this up then with Daniel chapter 2 and ask, or open the floor to any questions kind of broadly or generally about Christian life, coworkers, any other kind of shenanigans. Anybody have anything they want to share for like New Year's or what's going on in the church, stuff like that?
What are your thoughts on like seeing in the spirit? Like in sense of seeing the spirit, like is that
Seeing in the spirit.
like say like you have like a discernment, see deep thoughts on or something like that. You know, like I think they call it seeing in the spirit. That once you real like to get sense.
So
You're really sensitive.
what I would say to that is that it's a good question. When it comes to seeing in the spirit, I think a better term for it would be discernment. Being able to discern the presence of like a given spirit on someone.
Yeah.
Discernment is something that is talked about quite a bit in the New Testament. There's a church member that my wife and I knew at the church we met at who, I don't know how, but she was able to smell cancer on people. It was a very weird thing, and like she just
like an animal, like they have this animals.
Yeah, like it's not something that I can readily explain, other than this seems to be a strange form of discernment that she had to be able to, you know,
But like,
how
did
exactly
she
that
use
worked.
that then? Like, did she just walk up to someone and say you have cancer? Like,
Well,
okay.
okay.
How did that work?
That's a good question. So with discernment, something that goes hand in hand with it is a strong prayer life.
Yes.
So
I was gonna say.
Yeah, I noticed that I can discern more. Like, the more I'm closer I am to God, the more I see you reveal to me, and not like.
Yes.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
It can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
It can be uncomfortable, especially if you see something. Yeah, exactly. You can find yourself at kind of this crossroad of like, do I tell this person I know this thing, or what do I do with this information? What I would encourage you to do is to take it to the Lord in prayer. Something that I think is very relatable to anybody, whether Christian or not, is that there's a certain level of discernment that we all have, where we
Yeah.
can see like bad habits, for example, that people have, where you can see somebody, let's say at the grocery store, who they get upset and they start like screaming or yelling or cussing or whatever. It doesn't take a whole lot of discernment to see what's happening there. And having said that, what do you do with that? Do you go physically restrain this person? I discern that, they're in a bad way right now. I need to go physically restrain them. No. Do you need to go tell them, I see that you're angry? But what you can do, and what I would encourage you to do, is to pray for that person. So whether it's something that feels very surface level or something that might feel much more sinister, where maybe you can just tell that there's like a strong, battle with depression that somebody has, for example, or somebody that, there's a heaviness that you can just kind of feel in that person and you might not know what it is. First and foremost, ask the Lord, because he might lead you to go talk to that person, and he might not. There's not always a one size fits all here, but I would encourage you, pray about it and go to the Lord first. There's been times where, especially at church, there's been times where others have seen something on me and said like, hey, Ryan, can I just pray with you? And it's like, it's helped me a lot to be able to have that, brothers and sisters that are looking out for me, and it's really valuable to like be used by the Lord in that way to minister, especially to brothers and sisters in Christ, where you show up Sunday morning and it's like, I just feel like there's something off with this person. Say, hey, can I go pray with you real quick? Ask the Lord, God, I don't know what's going on here. Just give me the words. If you're not comfortable with that, or the Lord doesn't lead you to do that, just pray for them. Lord, I don't know what's happening here, but, please give them the strength that they need. Please minister to them today. Lord, I pray that worship would speak to their heart, that the message would speak to their heart. These kinds of things.
Well, I've had, before I was Christian, I had good discernment, but I've never actually seen.
Yeah, so going back to that, when, I love how, Ryan's, it's more discernment rather than, how you were saying, seeing the spirit. You hear people say that.
I've seen people's eyes turn completely black.
Exactly.
So, and it's not explainable, but I'm like, what do I do with that information? Something's obviously not right there. Within them, I don't know what it is, but they can be some of them are Christians, and I saw it. So I was like,
But, well,
it's scary.
It's very scary, and because a lot of people don't talk about this, especially at church. They don't want to. Yeah, they don't see it. They also even if they did see it, they don't want to admit that there really is good and evil in the world.
Yeah.
There really is God and Satan. There is demonic forces at play. So then people who are walking around and in the Word every day, and God is showing you are seeing in the Spirit. There is spirits around us. So for people to kind of downplay that and not think that that's not real.
I've heard Christians they just don't understand it, and I'm thinking maybe it's because they haven't seen for themselves, or maybe they don't have that gift or something. I don't know. But God is not going to show that either that to everybody. Yeah. So he's not even though people are Christian, it doesn't mean that then it makes them sound like they're saying they don't believe it almost.
Well, they don't believe.
Real quick. I want to add this. In Hebrews chapter 5, verse 14, it says, but strong meat belonging to them that are of full age, even those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil, that with maturity comes an ability to discern between good and evil.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Yeah. What does that mean? That means your ability to see these things is going to grow with your spiritual maturity in Christ.
Yes. And even if you are a babe in the faith, even when I was really young,
and I was just born again.
Exactly.
In the world, what is happening?
Right, even me as like a child, like being
Yeah.
little. And I was a little girl and like I could see
Well, I
and
didn't
feel
know.
all kinds of
When I was
things moving around me.
You know, like I had ghosts and all that stuff, they're all seasons.
Yeah.
I didn't know that's what it was.
Yeah, it's a demon. And so like when you have people just in the world that you can literally see black eyes or things like that,
That
or
freaks me out,
something
it's like,
like that.
and it's been people I love too, and I'm
And
like,
you don't need to freak out because God doesn't give us a spirit of fear.
yeah.
So we don't need to freak out immediately when I said we
Yeah.
pray immediately. And sometimes it has to be so immediate that you have to open your mouth.
Yeah.
You have to plead the blood of Jesus. Like, God, I need you to rebuke this thing. Like, you don't rebuke it. You don't go and try to attack that thing, okay?
No.
Because if you think you're going to be able to do it, it's going to jump onto you. And you won't even know it, though. A lot of times when people have this stuff, they don't even know that it's even going on.
I know, that's the weirdest thing about it, like I can see what's going on in their spirit, and they don't even know what's
But
happening.
they don't even have
The
a
one who was a girl who's not a Christian, she was Christian's my very interested. And we were talking, she was asking me about sleep paralysis and stuff like that. And I was explaining to her, I started telling her testimony. As soon as I mentioned the Lord Jesus, her eyes just completely black. I was like, like she was doing my hair. I could see it in the mirror. I was like I could see like something in her did not like what I was saying.
No, because
Oh,
the
man.
enemy has to flee as soon as we call on his name.
Yeah, it was nuts.
That's why he asks us to keep our eyes on him. God,
Yeah.
Jesus tells
Well, I
us,
kept
keep
going
your
too. I
eyes
was
like fixed on
I'm
me.
gonna keep talking about it.
Yeah, because that's why I said no spirit of fear. Like our weapon is that we literally stay in his word. So it's like we plead the blood of Jesus.
Yeah.
We call if we have no other words but his name,
Yeah.
there he is. So we don't need to be afraid of that because that's what the devil wants. He wants us to be afraid. He wants us.
He didn't want me to talk about Jesus to her because she's kind of a little bit lost and stuff. So it was like perfect. Yeah.
He doesn't want that. That's why, like, even though we love God so much, we have to, as Christians, realize that. I mean, the devil was there. He fell. He got kicked out. He took 1/3 of the angels with him. What do you think that they're doing? They're running around rampant. You know, so it's not some perfect kumbaya, like I
But
like
I
to
think
say.
for most people, like if I were to tell them that story, they would think I was nuts. Even Christians.
Oh, I know.
So it's like,
Trust me, if I've been
That's
dealing with this
what
as
I
a
grew
kid.
Christian, but I grew up like a church that we had to my life. And stuff
it was
like,
very proper and
yeah,
like,
well, it was just not proper, it was just like,
it's like the basics.
there wasn't any, like, I don't know, spiritual activity stuff.
Yeah.
But like, I've had experiences where I'm like, no, this is much more real than I thought. And so, it's still like, kind of weird for me
Yeah.
to be in conversation about, like, I totally believe. And I'm
Yeah.
like, so I'm just from
It's your own.
experiences, and you
Yeah.
have to believe it to, like, to exist, to see it. You're not gonna just, like, yeah,
Oh,
so.
right before I was born again, I didn't even believe in hell, like I didn't think that was a real thing, so God was gonna show me that stuff.
Mhm.
And then as soon as I believed, it was like, oh, there it is.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah. I've believed in it my whole life, and so that's why being so young and like when I would try to talk and people would be looking at me. So I learned very young age. Well, I could talk about it with my mom. My mom was the only one that would listen. She was the only one. Yeah, she was the only one that I could talk to about it, and she'd listen, and I was very grateful and things like that. And so as I've gotten older, I've met other people that actually have experienced these things too. And so it's so nice to get to talk to people that have like gone through something, and like even if they've gone through it themselves, which can be very scary, to go through that, even your own self and your Christian. It's like the church did something.
Yeah.
So it's,
I think it's a big problem here in like the Western world that spirituality is very on a surface level, it's very like paper thin, and like people, they look at the spiritual realm and kind of the reality of the spirit world as like, like, you know, it's like scary movies or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, it's kind
We
of,
try to be like, make it more grounded, like if I can't see it with my naked eye, but like if I saw it with my naked eye,
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
that's real.
well,
it's
right.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, it just feels like, it's just kind of like a Hollywood thing, you know, it's their depiction of these things, and like,
Mm-hmm.
to some measure, I don't disagree, but at the same time, one would have to be, I make the case, foolish to completely deny the reality of the spirit world and its ability to influence the physical world around us. Like, there's things that I haven't personally experienced, but I've talked to people that have, they've told me they've experienced certain things. They've experienced like waking up and they don't have a cat or a dog and there's a bunch of like physical scratches on their legs that they can see. There's like weird things like this, things like moving around in their house that like, they're things that like, I don't, it's hard to explain from a purely like physical standpoint how these things would happen. But, you know, these people, these individuals that I'm talking about, they also were wrapped up in a very like dark side of spirituality before coming to Christ. And unfortunately, there were like much more severe battles on that side of things that they dealt with than I think most people do. But that's not to say it's any less real for the rest of us. It's just many people don't really, they don't recognize the battle that they're in. That ultimately is what it is, you know. If we learn anything from the scriptures, it's that there's a battle over your soul from the time that you're
Yes.
born till the time that you were put in the dirt, and
And that's why he equipped us with the word, because he knew, you know, he didn't just leave us out here with nothing. So that's why it's important, you know, to, I don't care if you're 7 years old, read the Bible.
Yeah.
Read the Bible, because little kids be so afraid to go to sleep, talking about monsters under the bed. You better start praying. They're so vulnerable. And I'm like, you have to learn to pray. Go get your parents, tell them to pray with you. Don't be afraid to go to sleep and get in that bed.
Well, now I'm like thinking back, like my mom never taught me how to pray when that stuff was going on. Like she knew, so.
Probably not. Probably not. No. I mean, if the church isn't helping people to, right, but if the church isn't talking about it and teaching her, she's not gonna, you know, they're sitting there saying none of this stuff is real.
Yeah.
Well, then they're not equipping the saints to understand that, like, we are in a, we are, you
You know,
know,
in the churches, they fail people.
for sure.
Anyways.
In many ways, yeah. And so, yeah, it's good that we can talk and know what to do, you know, when it happens, because I have lots of stories. I have lots, even recently. Yes. Oh yeah, lots, and yeah, just good to stay calm. That's all you can do.
Yeah, I just continue to stay in the moment, but in the moment, I always like move it. I had like, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I should talk about that.
Yeah.
Very about that.
I think it's interesting that they changed their names in Daniel. I feel like they did that to when you change the name like that, it's like you remove. I learned that when I went to Israel. They said that when you change, it had to do with they mentioned this example with Yeshua, obviously, and they said, you know, when you change his name to Jesus, you are taking away part of his identity. Anytime somebody changes the name from the name that they were originally given, it's taking away part of their identity. So to see that in the book of Daniel, and I had forgotten, I had totally forgotten about the fact that that's not their actual names.
Right.
But that's the names that everybody knows them by.
Yeah.
Like, that's not.
Well, I was thinking that's just basically when you get married and change your name.
I think
My mouth just got changed recently, and I did have a sense of feeling like part of me is erased.
Exactly.
It's a weird feeling.
It's
I was like, oh, that person doesn't exist anymore.
Technically, no.
Like literally does not exist.
Yeah, technically, no. It's weird. Yeah.
But I'm like, where
It
did that
happens
come
in a
from?
good way too, though, like.
Oh yeah, now we're
changes
one flesh, yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
all-
That's true.
Yeah,
too.
it's all the
Yeah.
same, yeah. And then we get a
Yeah.
new name when we go
Yeah.
to heaven. So like that is, yeah. I think about name stuff all the time. That is
Yeah,
like
we hear
true.
about it.
racist.
For sure.
Yeah.
Like Jacob had his name changed to
Yes. To
Israel
Israel.
Yeah.
Mhm.
after he wrestled with God.
Well, I guess he lost the Jacob identity then, because he became, you know what I mean? Because that's what they had said when we were there, and I was like, oh, an interesting thing for them to say. Like I never heard, before then, I had never heard anybody say that.
Yeah.
So I was like,
Even
interesting.
Abraham and Sarah were Abram and Sarai, and they had their
Yes,
names
that's
changed as well. So
Yeah.
it
I
is
remember
interesting.
my
such
friend
names.
and she had her name Sarai, and
Mhm.
it's spelled Sarai.
Yeah.
And she's from Mexico. And
Yeah.
she would like tell me, oh, people always say Sarah. And she never corrects them.
I like it the other way.
Yeah, they go, no, your name is Sarai. Like, why would
Yeah,
you?
that's pretty.
And she's like, oh, no. Like, oh, yeah. Tell her, like, oh, yeah. Just help them to learn it. It's not that hard.
Yeah.
Sarai. Like, we learned this in kindergarten. So, yeah, people would always say,
Oh.
sit here. Like, no, you're not here. It's not even me.
Oh, I wonder if we're like why we started taking on the man's last name.
I was
that
always